This is Jancho. We're back for another episode of the Libertarian Uncensored podcast. And this time we're looking at the post for the past day. So first we have Immigration Non-Invasion from Reason.com by Harumph, and that is, a critique of claims that the federal government and the states can use military force to prevent immigration based on constitutional powers to prevent invasion. And so I personally think I once could just say that immigration is invasion, but it's ultimately what the government defines it as, because they have force on their side. They always like to say so. If they want to declare it as invasion, they are ultimately able to do so, and I think that's important to remember. It's ultimately they have control of the force, and that's what ultimately matters in the end. Next, we have ban on transgender college athletes poised to become law in Texas. I personally don't think that should be the dominion of the government. It's something I personally support because I think the differences between biological females and biological males are drastic enough to justify separating them into different sporting categories, especially after puberty. With that being said, I'd also support freedom of association. If everyone on the team is fine with having a transgender player and the opponents are all fine with it too, they should have the freedom of association to play each other. And, you guess, let's see. So I personally think, maybe if puberty blockers were effective, I don't know how effective they are and how much side effects there are, but we could look into those maybe. I personally don't think they're effective because Chelsea Gabbard cited some studies about them, but we'll see how that goes. And with trans kids shouldn't be forced to go for puberty. Crazy thing is everyone's eventually forced to go for puberty, or like or not. Puberty blockers can only go so far, and that's important to remember as well. So we'll see how that jury comes out in those. Then we have Senator Ted Cruz. It's also important to remember that everyone has an agenda of puberty blockers as well, so that's important to remember. And we have Senator Ted Cruz calls for probe into Bud Light over Dylan Mulvaney ad campaign marketing tour from FoxNews.com, and that is from Donald Key. And that is, I personally think that's kind of a government. It's kind of just the government just doing culture wars. Instead of looking to probing that, should be probing who was on Epstein's client list. And I think that's important to remember. We still don't know who's on Epstein's client list, and we got to find it out soon. I would say, or they'll just get some other guy to do it. I would say. So I think that's probably already happening right now. So that's just the sad truth, I would say. So that's my thoughts on that. So next we have Disney pulls plug on $1 billion development in Florida from New York Times another one by Donald Key. And I think that if Disney doesn't want to spend money on it's be forced to do so. But I do think they do have the argument that Florida's being hostile to them, and I'd agree with that. But I personally don't really care because Disney's a multi-billion-dollar corporation, and those corporations really don't care too much for pros like me and a lot of other people. Then we have got the Banhammer from Libertarian Meme today from Zealous Ideal Teach 41, and that is a post. So I got nothing new more just calling out a Boston Giraffe for being a thin-skinned chicken shit and banning me for having the goal to question American isolationism in a world in which I can get away from any to any point within a day's travel, and for saying that Capstown will only ever exist in their imagination. So I personally would kind of agree with a Boston Giraffe there, but I don't think that's a reason to ban anyone. I think the thing is that I'm pro free speech in this, and I personally think there's a lot of Marxists on this subreddit, but I'm pro free speech, and I believe they have the ability to say what they want, because if you want to declare yourself libertarian, I think it doesn't matter what your ideology is, you should be able to do so. If you want to say you're a libertarian fascist, or libertarian communist, or libertarian socialist, you should be able to do so, although I'm critical of all those ideologies, I would say. So let's see, what do we have next? Disney pulls the plug on 1 billion. Oh, we did that. It's a repost of Disney pulls the plug. Weird way to protest by Kage blah blah blah, and that was 18 hours ago. And it's a tweet from Tolly Tower tonight on W Ball TV 11. A man from AR-15 has been showing up for weeks to the school bus drop-off for local elementary school students. Parents say their kids are afraid. The man says he's protesting Governor Westmore's new gun control law. You will hear from both sides at 5 to 6 p.m. And I think that's interesting. I think that's kind of a bit of a weird way to protest. I agree there, but I think he has every right to do that as long as he doesn't violate the NAP. So that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have Kentucky passed one of the most extreme anti-LGBTQ plus bills in the country. From it's a link from another subreddit. What subreddit is it? True Kentucky. And I think the thing is, what isn't even that LGBTQ anymore? I guess government shouldn't be passing those, but it's at this point, what even are there is to be anymore? It's like they're asking it's like they're treating it's like Uganda, it's treating like there's gonna be camps for the LGBTQ people, and I don't know if that's really coming, but I do think it's not the government's role to restrict freedom of expression, but they do have the ability to enforce that. As we was just talking about the immigration and invasion article from Reason, they have the ability to enforce whatever they feel like because they have the force on their side. So that's important to remember as well. So then we have no, the U.S. has never fallen to staff for failing to raise the debt ceiling from WFA.com by another one by Harumph. And I think the U.S. has defaulted before, and I think it could default this time. I'm not too sure on it, but even if it defaults, I don't think anything will really happen. That's what it feels like of life. If nothing really happens, it feels like the world's been collapsing for almost a decade now, and probably over a decade, and nothing's really happened. So nothing. So we'll see what happens. I guess I don't think too much is going to change regardless of what happens with the debt ceiling collapse. Supreme Court won't hold tech companies liable for user posts. And that is an archive link from Harumph. I think they usually archive links are from none of this one's from New York Times. And I think that's good because I think if you're driving a car and use it to and murder someone on purpose and murder them, I think you should hold the car company accountable. And I think that's the same in this scenario. I don't think you should hold tech companies liable for what the users say. I would agree with that. Yes. Then we have, I thank them for their service. What the fuck more do they want? GOP. That's Reddit post. Republicans on their way to cancel veterans' health care, knowing they can just get new soldiers every year. And so that's Mike Pence running out. I don't know who that is. I think that's So but it's all posted by motherfucking Nick, and I would agree with that. I personally think the veterans should have benefits for serving the country, but I guess you could debate that no one's entitled to anything even if they've served the country, so that's important to remember as well. Then we have Iranians are putting their lives, corneas, and testicles up for sale on Telegram to pay off debts amid rocking inflation and poverty. And everyone by mouth hugging this one from Insider.com. And I think I would support that. I think if you want to sell any parts of your body, you should be able to, and I think that's important to remember. If you want to sell any of your whole body, as like a prostitute, you should be able to as well, I would say. So that's important to remember as well. So I would think that's okay. Personally, hopefully, hope that inflation and poverty doesn't come to the U.S., but it looks like it might be only a matter of time. We'll see what happens there. Then we have Governor Greg Abbott signs electric vehicle fee into law. Senate Bill 505 requires electric vehicle owners to pay $400 to register a new electric vehicle. On top of the other fees, renewing registration will cost $200 from KVU.com. That's by Whittling Dan. And let's see. So I think we shouldn't have fees for anything. I say from the government, but we have to pay taxes, and this is kind of an extension of that, I would say. And the government can force you to pay whatever it wants because they have force on their side. That's what we're going into today. They have force on their side. That's important to remember. Then we have, does government exist? From the Libertarian Ideal, posted by the Libertarian Ideal. And one guy's on Rubber Stumpy commented, government's not even real, man. I would say it isn't if you think about it. Government only has legitimacy because people believe it does. Well, what happens if people stop believing it? They control force, but just because they can force you to believe something doesn't mean you have to believe it. So that's important to remember as well. All countries are social constructs. Humans created the idea of the United States and other countries, not anything else. If all humans cease to exist, would anyone still recognize the U.S.? Would anyone still recognize France or Germany or Russia? That's important to remember. So, it's all a social construct when you think about it. And I think that's really important to remember, yes. When wokes and racists actually agree on everything, but from Ryan Long, a YouTube video, and I posted that. And I said, but be as woke or racist as you want, but don't expect people to agree with it. The thing is, this woke mentality, it's like you need to view everything through the lens of intersectionality. But as I said in the last podcast, if you say the wrong things, they'll still come after you for it. You can't win. You have to agree with everything, and that's why it's important to put your foot down, say I disagree with you, and they'll come after you. They'll hate you for it. They'll throw hate at you. They'll throw everything they can at you. They'll maybe threaten you, but you have to stand up and stand by your beliefs if you think they're worth standing by. And I think my beliefs for free speech and free expression are worth standing by. So that's important to remember as well, yes. Then we have a little humor from IOWP.com by Patan Fertain, and it's from Harry Potter, but he's transgender, and he has to stay in the closet. So yeah, I guess that's just kind of mocking J.K. Rowling on her whole trans stance. I think J.K. Rowling's pretty on the left, but the thing is, you can't disagree with the left as well. So I've been talking about them not communicating for you for it, and that's important to remember. I think if you want to support trans people, you should be able to. But if you want to say, oh, they're infringing on women's spaces, you should be able to as well. Think for your thoughts and think whatever you want on the issue, but don't force other people to think what you believe, because that's using force. And you should never justify use of force. You shouldn't be like a government like that, and not standards. School choice opponents are full of double standards from Cato.org by Ruin My Circle Jerk. I would agree with that statement. Of course, this is it's kind of against school choice. It's more for the progressives. But yeah, I would agree with that statement very much. So we'll say that there. And next we have Rhode Island Councilman Matthew Riley found passed out in car holding crack pipe from nypost.com by Kage blah blah blah. And he appears to be a Republican, but I think they're all drug addicts. I would say all of them. Joe Biden's like in his 80s, Donald Trump's in his late 70s. You got to be on some drugs to get through the day. On that point, where you get to be over 70, I would say, and even you don't have to be 70. Look at Hunter Biden. He needs this crack pipe to get through the day too, and that's important to remember. Then we have when faith says to help migrants and the law says doesn't from the conversation and the law says don't from the conversation.com by Harumph. And yeah, I think you should do what your faith says is right. I'm personally more believing in your faith and values over the law says, because remember, it's important to remember that the law says what happened to Anne Frank was totally legal. The law says the Holocaust was totally legal, and that's important to remember. Just because something is legal does not make it moral, and we have to stand by our morals if we want to be good people according to ourselves. If we go by the law, we could be going against the law of what our morals say, and that's important to remember. So I would say that's my thoughts on that issue. Homelessness isn't an unfixable problem from Reason.com, and I agree with that. And so let's see. Start by looking at the government policies that have made it worse. Yeah, you can't have the tiny houses because they're not regulated. So I think that's important to remember. You have to, you gotta get rid of all these government policies that get in the way. And, that's the thing. The government, they always say, oh, we're going to help homeless people, but they never seem to help homeless people because they have too many rules. And that's important to remember. They have too many rules to help them, and the rules sometimes make it, you got all this red tape, and that's how it is. Yes, so that's important to remember how just all this bureaucracy and this red tape make it actually harder to help homeless people than easier. Georgia Democrat stands alone in state party in supporting school choice, calls her critics hypocritical from FoxNews.com and everyone by Room My Circle Jerk. I'd agree with that. Sometimes you have to go against what your party says, and I think that's always good. I always like people who stand up against their party, and yeah, I think that's really good. That's why John Tyler is probably my top 10 or 15 favorite presidents, because he stood up and was excommunicating from his party. I think we need another person like that today, who was not afraid to challenge with the rhetoric of their own party and split from them. I think that's always an important thing to remember. Oregon to publish names of people, businesses who owe $50,000 or more in unpaid state taxes from OregonLive.com by Frosty Slowman. And I think, I don't think the government should be publishing names of people and putting it out there. That kind of gives me Holocaust vibes, to be honest. But, I guess you do have the case. You do have a case for public accountability as well. But I don't think it's the government's job to hold people accountable if they are not members of the government, if I would say. So that's important to remember as well. Then we have Texas passes bill stripping authority from cities. Republican state legislature taking over regulatory control of Texas blue cities. I thought Republicans supported local small government rule from thehill.com by Chi-Town20. And I'd agree with that. I personally think I support nullification of liberty. Now, if the state doesn't like something, it should nullify the federal government. If the local government doesn't like something, it should nullify the state government. And if the individual doesn't like something from local governments, it should nullify that too. If you don't think the law is unjust, you should feel obliged to, I think, okay, so you should have a moral obligation to disobey said law, and that's important to remember as long as you don't violate the NAP. So that's my thoughts on the issue. Then we have big yikes on RFK Jr. for red flags from Chi-Town 20, and that's from Secular Talk, and he was apparently on the Who Flew on Jeffrey Epstein's illegally express plane, along with Donald Trump, Bill Clinton, Kevin Spacey, Chris Tucker, Bill Gates, and Prince Andrew, and John Glenn, and George Mitchell, and Zach Perlman. I said, no different than the other elites, I guess. I was thinking maybe I would switch my support over to RFK Jr. because I'm right now for the Democratic Party. I say I support Williamson because I like how RFK Jr. just hired Kucinich. I really like Kucinich, but now I'm having second thoughts because he is part of a political dynasty, political family in the Kennedys, and this does show we still might have elite ties. And, Chi-Town says, it's capitalism. I said, because people are only corrupt under capitalism and not under any other ideology. Yes, sarcasm. So I think that's important to remember. So yeah. All they do is actively stop progress so they can complain about the lack of progress. It's an imagery link from Kage blah blah blah. And it's Senator Ted Cruz tweeting, Anani's also listed the crises that Joe Biden is overseeing: inflation, gas prices, gas shortages, supply chain, border, baby formula shortage, crime wave, Afghanistan, Ukraine. Time and again, Biden has failed miserably in his response, and no liar of pride and Tyler Cohen response. Republicans have opposed legislation that would help address every single one of the things you just listed. The thing with that, though, is, who's going to pay? That's the important question. That's why Republicans usually ask. It's important. Legislation is not going to automatically solve all those problems. Ted Cruz blames Joe Biden, but the government should only have so much power to deal with all these problems because sometimes you just can't have the government solve all your problems for you, and that's important to remember. You gotta have some sense of agency, I would say, and that's something you have to remember. You gotta stand up for yourself sometimes too. Yeah. Then we have Senator Tim Scott files paperwork to run for president in 2024 election. I personally think that'd be him or Larry Elder would be a good GOP nominee because of the Dems' identity politics would probably hopefully backfire on them. I personally probably won't vote for either of them, but I just think it'd be funny to see the black vote go over the Republicans, especially when the Dems feel so entitled to it. It's like Joe Biden saying, if you can't decide whether you're from me or Trump, you ain't black, So that's kind of my thoughts on that. So I think that might be interesting. Then we have New York State Legislature pushing bill would criminalize reporting children without their consent from TechDirt.com by Harumph, and I said, I think you should probably not record anything without their consent, but I really question if that should be criminalized / legal, especially if someone accidentally walks by me recording and doesn't consent if they hear about the video later. Next we have Democrats versus others versus Libertarian progressives and Libertarian social democrats from Chi-Town, everyone by Chi-Town.